To the Release Show. I'm your host, Brittany. On today's show, we have Isaac Wright Jr. Isaac is an American lawyer in the state of New Jersey. Wright was wrongfully convicted in 1991 on 10 charges and sentenced to life in prison. Representing himself, Wright ensured all charges were overturned and even got a police officer to admit under oath to evidence tampering. After winning his freedom, Wright earned his law degree and has gone from wrongful life sentence to being one of the most sought out attorneys in the country. While his life events may seem extreme, Isaac's story is far too familiar to many New Yorkers. He has faced tremendous struggle, hardship, and adversity. And yet, despite having his freedom stolen from him, Isaac never stopped pursuing his true justice. He also helped to overturn 20 of his fellow inmates' convictions, reuniting dozens of families in the process. He is currently running to become the mayor of New York City because he wishes to solve symptomatic issues like housing, the criminal justice system, symptomatic racism, and lack of adequate public transportation. Isaac is committed to the fight of justice wherever injustice exists. He's the hero that the city needs. Let's welcome Isaac.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show.
That was a pretty good introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go deep into your story, how was your life growing up in South Carolina?
Well, I grew up in South Carolina a part of my life. I was raised in a military family. So before even going to, I was actually born in Florida. My family moved 2 months after I was born. And, I lived all over the world. And then when my father was closing into retirement, he went back to his ancestral town, which is South Carolina, a small town called Moncks Corner. And, I finished school there and then went from there up to New York. But growing up in South Carolina, I call it not only a refreshing part of my life, but a very, very informative part of my life when it came down to the ingredients of survival. I mean, it was a time in my life where we were in a place where my father was able to teach us how to grow food, how to then harvest that food, and what we didn't eat, we sold. And so, we even, we hunted. I mean, it was, it's the South. And so we did the things that, that good old Southern boys did. And that was a really, really great, incredible part of my upbringing, learning how to survive.
That's great. I'm actually live in Florida right now, currently.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm from
South
Nashville,
Florida, right?
Tennessee. Yeah, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, but I live in Florida.
Okay. Okay.
Nice. In the 1980s, you were a producer for the Cover Girls, in which your wife was a part of the group. What was it like being a producer in the 80s?
Well, the 80s was a tragic period on one side, but it was an incredible period, on another side, especially in the music industry. The 80s was a time where music was transcending. Dance music was really, really big. Hip hop was in its infancy. And, there was just a lot of money in the street when it came down to things like entertainment shows. I mean, this was the very first time in the 80s where entertainers, was able to ask for large sums of money. It began really in the 80s for large sums of money to perform. And that just grew and grew and grew and grew until today. You had $300,000, $500,000 for a show. That was unheard of back then, but it was still a barrier. And so it was just a very, very exciting time to be alive because of the way in which the world was transitioning and because of the way how entertainment was evolving at that time. So I loved it. I loved every second of it.
Good. So how was it working with your wife?
We were married very young. I met her actually in Charleston. She was being raised by her grandmother, and I met her at a dance contest. And that young love was real crazy. We got married as kids, man. We got married and had a kid, and it was like the relationship was like it was like a brother and sister, friends, husband and wife, all wrapped them into one. We were really too immature to understand what it really truly meant to be husband and wife. Because we were, I think I was 19, 20, and she was, 17, 18 years old. It was one of those things. But we made it. We struggled in the beginning, and fortunately I got on Star Search, and that really changed our lives. Back then, being on Star Search, especially for a Black man, to be on Star Search, you go back to the neighborhood, you're a hero, and because hip hop was still evolving, I was that go-to guy that was on national TV. So it put me in a position to really be able to parlay, a lot of great things in my life within entertainment, and to be able to create the group, along with its other founders, Andy Panda and Al Sabator, owner of Disco Fever. We created that group together, and they sold millions of records. So it was a great time.
That's great. In 1991, you were convicted of 10 charges and sentenced to life. What went through your mind when you were in the courtroom and the judge read off your convictions?
Well, you're talking about when I was sentenced or when I was arraigned?
When you were sentenced.
The first thing that happened, when I got sentenced, it began very unusual. And then, it all came to me as to why these things were happening at that moment. But I remember, as the judge was talking, the prosecutor, he was at a table to my right, listening to the judge talk about the trial, talk about the case, the evidence, and all this stuff before, he lays the foundation before he gives the sentence. And so as he's laying this foundation to sentence me, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. And when I looked over, it was the prosecutor, the guy who prosecuted me, Nicholas Bissell. He left his table and he walked up to the judge's bench while the judge was talking. So that was kind of strange to me. And then he turns around, walks over in the front of the judge's bench to get right in front of me, and he turns his back to the judge. The judge is still talking, and the judge is acting like he doesn't even see what's going on. He just continues to talk. Now, by the time Bissell turned his back to face me, the judge handed down my life sentence on the Kingpin conviction. And then Bissell starts smiling at me. So he wanted to make sure that when I got that life sentence, that we were able to look in each other's eye, so that he can see me smiling at what was happening to me. I mean, this is just it's a very subtle part of the catastrophe. I mean, when you look at it, it's a really tragic event for a prosecutor to do that. But in the scope of all the things that I went through, that was one of the subtle moments along the line of that tragedy. But, he smiled at me and I smiled back at him. And after the life sentence, as we stood there smiling at each other, I didn't hear anything else. I mean, he was reading off sentences for about 15, 20 minutes. And, I didn't, I'd already gotten life. So I didn't really hear much at all. And then after the sentencing was over with, Bissell went back to his table. The gallery behind him was full of law enforcement, and they were shaking hands and patting each other on the back, and they got that win, and they got another person to serve, another Black man to serve life in prison. So that was my experience at sentencing, me getting a life sentence, and he and I staring each other down with a smile. He was smiling for one reason. I was actually smiling for an entirely different reason that showed itself, some years later.
Okay, so what were you smiling about?
I knew he was playing the short game, and I knew that they had no idea that I was playing the long game. I never went to trial thinking, I was hoping, but I never went to trial thinking that I was going to win. I knew that they were going to send me to prison for the rest of my life. And so everything that I did, every single waking moment, every strategy, every move that I made, knowing that they were going to get me, was to keep them from keeping me there once they got me, because that part of it was over. I knew it from the very beginning. I saw what they were doing. I understood the need to make an example out of me, and I understood the challenges that I was facing with the system. I mean, this is a system that has unlimited resources. I'm outmanned, I'm outgunned, and I'm alone. So the issue was to make sure that they did not see me coming. And when they eventually did see me coming, it was too late. And that's why I'm smiling.
I was really inspired by your story after reading about it, and I'm eager to know, how are you able to represent yourself, clear your name of the charges, and even make an officer admit under oath to evidence tampering without being a lawyer?
You know, that's a I'm going to try to condense that, because that's a long and really complex story, in the sense that I was, at the time that these things were going on, I filed a lawsuit against the county and the prosecutor in the state a couple of months after I was arrested. And I was fighting a criminal case and a civil case simultaneously. And so there was evidence that I was collecting. You know, one of the things about civil cases that's different than criminal cases is that a civil case allows you to go on, for lack of a better word, a fishing expedition. I can get a person in a deposition and ask him what he was doing in his mother's home. I mean, I could just ask for anything. I mean, there'll be objections, but there's no stopgap. What you can ask for from an evidentiary standpoint in a civil case. At a deposition, there's no judgment. You know, you can have a guy sitting at a deposition for 8 hours, 9 hours, the whole day, just questioning him about anything you want. There's going to be objections that's going to be made for the record, but there's nobody to really stop you from doing it. You know, as he barges out and leaves, and then you'll wind up getting fined by the court for doing that. And so I collected a lot of evidence, and, you know, I made moves in my civil case that was moves to really redirect the situation to show one thing when altogether different. Altogether, I was doing something completely different. Ultimately, that wound up me winning a motion, you know, and I'm gonna jump from the criminal case, because a lot of things happened during the course of that time. A lot of incredible movements happened during that time, and I was making new laws, getting people out. But what actually got me out, what actually got me to be able to get a law enforcement to confess, was something that I found in my civil case. I won a motion to be transported from the maximum security prison to the prosecutor's office, and he was forced via that court order, to allow me to look through his files. So they brought me there and changed, you know, there's an entourage of law enforcement following me from the prison. I pull up to the prosecutor's office. I'm duck walking and the ankle chains, and, you know, my arms together with my folder in my arms, my elbows. And they escort me on the elevator up to the prosecutor's office. They put me in a room full of a bunch of files, and I spent the entire day looking. I knew they were going to sanitize the file. They were going to remove things that was obvious that could help me. So I looked for those minute things, and I found a document. I wasn't able to use it until a couple of more years later. I mean, this was really a patience game. But I found a single document, which was an inter-office memo. All it did was direct law enforcement to read the files in my case to prepare for trial. It was a memo that was written back when I was going to trial, and they left it in the files. When I saw it, I saw my freedom. When they saw it, they just saw a memo. So I asked them to copy it and give me a copy of it, and they did. You know, a few years later, I got a law enforcement officer on the stand, and I used that document to break him. You know, the way I use it is an entirely different story, and we don't have time for that. But just to give you the gist of what happened, you know, he didn't even know. You know, one of the powerful things about the document was not its contents, but the fact that he had no idea that I had it, and the prosecutors had forgotten they had given it to me. And when I put my motions in, I didn't put it in the discovery. I didn't put it in the back of the motions as evidence with all the other evidence that I put in my motions. I kept that to my vest. And the reason why is because, you know, there's no such thing as unfair, or supposed to be. There's supposed to be no such thing as surprises in court. And each person is responsible to hand over the evidence that you have against the other person. The prosecutor has to give me their evidence, and whatever evidence I'm going to use, I got to give it to them. Well, this is how well I understood the law. I didn't give that to them, and I surprised them with it. But the reason why I was able to get away with it is because the document came from them. It was their document from the very beginning. So when it finally popped up a number of years later in this hearing, you know, which was my last stand, it was a PCR hearing. My appeals was gone. They tried to object to it. When they saw that, you know, this guy was on the ropes, they tried to object to it. And once the court found out it was their own document that they had copied and given to me years before, he was like, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And he allowed me to proceed. And by the time I was over with, this guy was, on the stand crying and, telling the judge what happened.
Wow. So
At
what
that
ended up
time, there
happening
was,
with the
cell phones, and the reporters was running back and forth out of the courtroom to use the phones, because at that time there was no cell phones that you could put in your pocket. So it was like this rush back and forth. When this guy was spilling his guts, there was, the courtroom was full of reporters, and they were just running back and forth out the door into the hallways using the cell phone. It was crazy, but for me, it was like it was a like this buzz in my head, because he was confessing in front of me, and behind me, my mom was crying and screaming, and all I could hear was her voice saying, why did you do this to my son? Why did you do this to my son? And so I was in between those two things. I was in between a confession in front of me, and years of agony that was playing itself out behind me. So it was just incredible emotional buzz, that was happening to me at the time this guy was confessing.
So what's your opinion on the current legal system of America? Is it more fair compared to the past, or nothing has changed?
I would have to say both, because as an attorney, I'm seeing some of the things that hasn't changed. But one thing that I do know that I can say that has changed, and when I say this, a lot of people are going to be able to relate to it, and this is what I think is probably most significant about what I did. What people have to really, really concentrate on in my story and in my case is that the things that I did it in the 90s. This was a time not only of the height of mass incarceration, but this was a time that they were eviscerating. They were just annihilating Black and brown families. They were coming in. You watch TV and you see a mob guy being escorted out of his house in handcuffs alone, and they put him in a car, they drive him off. When they went into our neighborhoods and they went into our houses, they took the mother, the father, the sister, the brother, the grandmother, the aunt. They wouldn't care if you were blind or in a wheelchair. They took everybody and they arrested everybody, charged them, and then they forced the family members to betray each other, to cooperate against each other. It was just a complete annihilation, of the Black family. And so you got to understand, this was a white police in the 90s that actually put himself in jail in order that I be released. And we can't lose sight of that. We're in the age of technology now, where you have social media, everything's highlighted. You have a flashlight on the criminal justice system, and there are some changes that has happened for the better. But back then, the environment was lock them up, throw away the key. Nobody cared. They did exactly what they wanted to do. And it was that environment that allowed the prosecutor to do the things that he did in my case. Some of the things were horrific. And when you look at who all was involved, it was the prosecutor, it was the judge. My prosecutor killed himself. My judge went to prison. The police officer, one of the lead police officers is in my case. He confessed and went to jail. Some of the defense attorneys was put up on the ethics committee because they knowingly had their clients to lie on me in order to give them deals. It was an incredibly tragic moment related to the injustice, not only of the system itself, but on an individual one. Like, who am I? Why was I so important to do that to? It was like there was no reason. There was absolutely no motivation to do what was done to me, except to make an example out of me for everybody to fall in line. That was it. That was it.
And I'm sure that's what they were doing, just trying to make an example out of you.
Absolutely. But we both had our turns. We both had our opportunities to make examples. And so he had his, and then God gave me mine.
That's right.
That's the way that worked out.
That's right. It worked out for the good. It has estimated that between 2.3% and 5% of all U.S. prisoners are innocent. This means that the number of 2.4 million incarcerated Americans, approximately 120,000 people, may be detained due to wrongful conviction. Why do you think this happens in such large amounts?
Because of the way, the misunderstanding that people have about the criminal justice system. There are certain things that they do know about it. And that is the area that is grounded in racism and certain other biases. But what helps racism and bias to succeed, to effectively succeed in the criminal justice system is the unknown, the essence of what American jurisprudence means, the essence of what our criminal justice system means and what it's founded on. And to be able to explain that in the simplest way, I'm going to use an analogy. The criminal justice system, the foundation of the way the proper and lawful administration of justice moves forward, is based on a fiction. Now, we all know that nonfiction is true and fiction is false. But the foundation of law, as it applies to the facts in our criminal justice system, is fiction, and it cannot survive without it. And let me give you an example to make it explicitly clear. When a jury renders its verdict, and it doesn't matter whether that verdict is guilty or not guilty, what people don't understand is that a jury's verdict is fiction. If it was fact, guilty people wouldn't go to prison. I'm sorry, innocent people wouldn't go to prison, and guilty people wouldn't go free. If a jury's verdict was fact, the innocent would never be convicted. It would always be a factual result. A person did it, he's convicted. A person didn't do it, he's acquitted. So the jury verdict in and of itself is a fiction. When you're convicted by a jury, that's really a fiction. When you're actually acquitted by a jury, that's a fiction also. But when you're acquitted and you haven't done it, that's a fiction that has worked. You understand? It's no different than a guy in a getaway car. His friend is supposed to do a grab and snatch in a jewelry store. He reaches across the counter. His friend goes to the store. He's sitting in the car. His friend reaches across the counter, grabs the jewelry, and as he's walking out, the guy behind the counter pulls out a gun. His friend sees it and pulls out his gun. The guy in the car don't even know his friend has a gun, but he pulls out his gun. He kills the guy in the jewelry store. Well, the driver is going to get convicted as though he did it too. You understand? That's a fiction. But that fiction is based on laws called conspiracy, called accomplice liability. But it's not true. This man that's sitting in the car didn't pull a trigger. He didn't kill anybody, but he's going to prison as though he does. And the reason why they do that is because they believe that the proper and lawful administration of justice demands that in order to dissuade people from even being involved in crime with other people is to make them responsible as though they did it. In some cases, that fiction works. In other cases, it doesn't. But what happens is, because it's this fiction that's going on, when you have when you have justice being implemented based on racism and biases, that fiction helps it along. You know, if you're a racist in the system and you have certain biases against me, and you know that the foundation of law is fiction, you can now use that fiction against me. You can use that fiction to charge me with things that I did not commit and actually convict me of it, because you understand how that fiction works and you don't understand how to use it improperly and unjustly as opposed to using it properly. And so that's the reason why. Obviously, there's this bias and there's a racism that causes a lot of tragedy in the system. But because the foundation of the proper and lawful administration of justice, from a standpoint of applying the law to the facts, is based on a fiction, it allows that injustice, that racism, it allows it to flourish. And then when you have attorneys, you know, that turn their backs, you know, on these things, and a lot of them do. It's unfortunate because I am an attorney, and I've been a victim of that back turning scenario. I've seen clients come to me, you know, that were disenfranchised with their attorneys, and after looking at their case, I understood that their attorneys did turn their backs. Whatever the reason is, it happens. And that contributes to the tragedy with that is that you're a defense attorney. You're not supposed to contribute, you know, to some of these things that are decimating our communities. But, you know, it happens. It happened back then. It was worse then, but it's still happening today.
Yes, and I'm gonna go back to the example that you brought up. I remember my uncle thought he was a doctor, so he used to write his own prescriptions. And so my cousin and I rode to, I think it was Walmart, and he went in there to the pharmacy and he got caught. Okay. And they came out to the car to get us like we were criminals too. We didn't know what he was doing, you know, and we were underage, you know, and I don't think they knew that at the time, but I'm not, you know, not sure. I think we were in high school.
Mhm.
And so they like marched us up to this room, held us in there until her mother came and got us. But it was crazy. Like they
Yeah.
were treating us like we committed a crime, and we didn't even know what he was doing. We thought he was just going in there to go get his prescription and come back out, and go. Like I didn't know what he was doing. But it is so true that the innocent people get treated wrong as well.
Absolutely, and that's a part of that. That's a part of moving a person through the system in a way where they minimize the risk of losing. And so, if it takes them damaging an innocent person to win against another person, or to win against that innocent person, they're going to do that. You're just in the way. You cannot. The moment you fight, you're a person that's in the way, and they're going to deal with you like that accordingly. But even when you go to those numbers that you talked about in the very beginning, the percentages of people that are innocent but found guilty, those numbers, when you consider, because you were talking about the truly innocent, but
Mhm.
when you consider the fiction that I was talking to you about, those numbers are much higher. And I'll give you an example of what I'm saying when I say that. Take a person that's really guilty of uh, something in the third degree,
Mhm.
and let's just say a burglary. A prosecutor can easily, when he goes to a grand jury, can easily turn that third degree burglary into first degree robbery. The way he can manipulate the facts, he can turn that into a robbery. Now, and so here's where the fiction comes in, and here's where this guy is actually innocent. He gets convicted of robbery. He's really innocent. He's guilty of third degree burglary, but he's actually innocent of robbery. What robbery does for the government is it gives them another notch up on high end convictions, and it allows them to sentence that person to much more time than he's actually responsible for. And so, if you included those kinds of misconduct in your analysis, that percentage would be much higher than that. I think it would be double or triple, if not more.
Wow. The Biden administration aims to improve the country and take it a step forward from where it is today. Do you think this progress will involve legal operations?
You know, um, President Biden, from my point of view, is a work in progress for me, and I say that for a couple of reasons. Number one, I was a victim of President Biden's policies. He was the one who pushed through, the criminal justice reform back then that resulted in mass incarceration. So I was a victim of his policies, and being a victim of his policies, I think he's probably in the best position to make those changes, to reverse himself and make amends for the catastrophic state that the criminal justice system found itself in because of those policies. So, I think on one side of it, he's a breath of fresh air in terms of some of the things that we've endured for the last few years. But on the other end, I know that I was one of his victims, and so I got a wait and see approach to him. I have confidence that he's there to do the right thing, and to turn things around. But I want to be able to see it. I want to be able to feel those changes. Because there's a lot of shaking hands and telling lies in politics, and there's a lot of making promises that you can't keep, or that other people is going to make sure you don't keep. And so, at the end of the day, if I don't feel those changes for me, for my clients, and for the community at large, if I don't feel those changes, then he's not going to get my vote of confidence.
Yeah, and I understand that a lot of people say he's a work in progress because of his past history. So I totally understand. So let's talk about the ABC legal drama television series For Life that is inspired by your life. How involved were you in this project?
Oh, I read every script, and what people don't know is that for an episode, the script is probably rewritten about 9 times. Each episode is 9 times the script it goes through this incredible vetting process, and so from the very beginning, from its creation, from me sitting down with the writer before we even pitched it to any network, I sat down with the writer, and together, we created the foundation of the show and the way it was going to play itself out. And from that point on, I get every script. I make my suggestions when I think I need to. And I go to the set, when I need to go, and I make my suggestions there. They have questions. I'm on standby with the calls. And so, yes, I've been intimately involved from day one till this very day.
That's great. So you have a television series about your life. Do you plan to write a book?
That's in the process now, actually, and we were hoping that we would be finished by April, but the campaign kind of slowed us down, so it's probably going to be later on in the year when it's done.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
You are currently running for mayor of New York City. What inspired you to want to become mayor?
There was two issues for me. One was the actual problems New York as a city has encountered. These were unique problems, and most of it's brought on by COVID. When COVID happened, maybe a month after COVID happened, I went into Times Square, and Times Square was completely empty. And for anyone that has ever been in Times Square, I mean, native New Yorkers know what I'm talking about. But anyone that's ever been in Times Square that doesn't live in New York, they'll know what I mean when I say that my jaw fell to the ground when I saw Times Square completely empty. There may have been a couple of people on Times Square, and there were law enforcement officers, but it was completely empty. And it scared me to see that. And I kept going back, every week for months, still empty, nothing going on. I went to visit a friend at his job. And he was a supervisor in a maintenance company, and I was talking to him. And as I was talking to him, we was going from floor to floor in this high-rise commercial building, and the floors were empty. And I was asking him, where's all these companies? They all moved out. And he was pointing to buildings. He was pointing out buildings. Their floors are empty. These floors, everybody's moving out. So I looked at that situation. Hundreds of thousands of jobs lost. Thousands of businesses moving out. New York City cannot even borrow money. It can't raise its own money. And a lot of people don't know that. Most New Yorkers don't know that. New York City as a city can't even raise its own money. The only way it can get money is either to beg the federal and state government or to raise taxes. Well, post-COVID, during COVID and post-COVID, you're not going to be able to raise the taxes because the jobs are not there to raise taxes. People don't have the money. And so it was clear that New York was in trouble. And when I went back, even back down to 1918 during the Spanish flu pandemic, hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. New York continued to move forward. New York was bustling. If you take that back up to our nearest tragedy, 9/11, thousands of people lost their lives. You drove up to Midtown, and New York was still moving forward. Times Square was bustling, even amongst this tragedy or that tragedy. But this time, it was something different. And I knew at that point that the next mayor of New York City have to be someone special. It cannot be the run-of-the-mill politician. This person is going to have to be a person that not only thinks outside the box, but someone that makes the impossible possible. And when I looked at all the candidates, I didn't see that. And then I had an awakening. I mean, it was an enlightening moment for me because it took me back to a moment in time when I was in prison, and I was actually in jail before I went to trial. And I picked up the law book. I picked up the law book for the first time. Before that, I was a successful entertainer, a successful businessman in entertainment. My wife was a successful entertainer. We were doing very, very well. We had the world in our hands, and I thought I had it all together. But I went to jail, and what really happened in prison is that I found myself. I thought I knew who I was, but I didn't. I found myself in prison. I found out who I was. That challenge that I faced, it caused me to explore my own abilities in ways that I never had before. It caused me to challenge myself in my intellect in ways that I've never had. And so I found myself in prison, who I really was, which is who I am today. And how that relates to me in New York, I had that same awakening. The moment I said to myself, you know what, New York is in trouble, it's on its knees, and it's going to take a special person to get New York back to its former glory. It was like, what has been happening to me these last couple of decades? all the things that I've gone through. The person that I'm saying that New York needs is me. I'm talking about the very person that's thinking about it. It was me. And so it was an awakening in the sense that when you look at a mayor, the current mayor of New York, sitting in Albany in front of legislatures, begging them to allow New York to raise money, it's like, wait a minute. And here's what I mean about thinking outside the box, right? It's like, wait a minute. How does any leader of the financial capital of the world, the richest city in the world, got to beg anybody? How does that happen?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense at all. You are, as mayor of New York City, you are the leader of the richest city in the world. What are you begging for? The ingredients for New York City's success, the ingredients for New York City's rebound is in New York City. New York City has 113 billionaires. More billionaires call New York home than in any city in the world. Mr. Mayor, knock, knock, pick up the phone. For me, and I'll give you an example when I say pick up the phone and when I say the lack of thinking outside the box. Those 113 billionaires, they profited $1 trillion during COVID alone. All right? They call New York home. One of them can write a check and get New York out of its deficit overnight. But I don't got to beg anybody. As mayor, what I have to do is this. Listen, I don't need 50% of you. I don't need half. I don't even need a third. I sit down and I say, listen, New York City wants to become your partner. We, as a city, we want to partner with you. And you know what we want to do with you? We want to create 2 incredible programs. One program, we want to have a young entrepreneur program, and the other program is a free enterprise program. In the young entrepreneur program, you know what we want to do? You and I want to do with these young kids coming out of high school, 18 years old. They may not want to go to college, but they got these incredible ideas. We want to give them grants to start their own businesses. We want to create that next great ingenious entrepreneur. Give them grants. Those high rises where the floors are empty, no problem. The city will rent them. And we'll put those young entrepreneurs in those floors. With the free enterprise programs, these are the guys with the most brilliant ideas. These are the next Microsoft. These are the next Amazons. These are the next Google. We're going to invest in them directly. We're not just going to give them grants. We're going to invest in them directly and become their partners so you can make a profit. So you can make a return on your money, Mr. Billionaire. We want to do this as partners. What does that mean? That means hundreds of millions of dollars being sunken into New York City's economy. That alone in 48 months can bring New York back around. Do you understand? And it's not, and we don't have that thinking. We don't understand that the answer a lot of times is right here. This is where it's at. You know? And so if we don't have that guy, if New York doesn't have that guy, that individual to get it together for New York, that's able to think outside the box, that's able to make the impossible possible, that's not intimidated by the complexity of his challenge, that meets that fight head on and conquer it based on his own intuition and judgment, with the ability to surround himself with brilliance that's going to take his ideas, his creativity, and execute it in ways nobody else can. This is what we need in New York. You know, I've done it in the past. I could do it on a bigger level in New York. And think about it like this. I did it alone. I did what I did. I moved through my challenges and was victorious alone with nobody to help me. New York, I'd have 300,000 employees.
Wow.
300,000 employees at my disposal. 200 of those 300,000 will be within my inner circle. So if I can do what I did alone, what do you think I could do with 300,000 heads?
A lot.
I can move mountains for New York City, you know? And so that's, you know, I hate to, I'm sorry that I got so impassioned about it, but it's time for us to stop allowing the shaking hands and telling lies. It's time for us to have people that's going to serve us, that's going to fall on the sword for us, because that's why they're doing this. Other than that, they don't need to be doing it. You know,
That's right.
I live by example, and all you got to do, you want to know what my honor and my integrity is? All you got to do is read about it. My honor and my integrity speaks for itself. I have given myself to the people for decades. From the moment I saw what the system has really been about, I've been fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. And that's exactly what I'm going to do for New York City.
And I hope that you win that election. You seem like you have a great plan together, and you already know what you want to do to change New York City.
Indeed. Indeed.
With your career moving at full speed right now, where do you see yourself in the future?
Hopefully, you know, at home on the river, with a line in the water fishing and a Mountain Dew at the table at my side, man. I just, you know, I'm a Mountain Dew kind of guy. I'm not the pina colada and the cocktails. Give me a Mountain Dew, and if all else fails, I'll take a Coke or a Pepsi, man. I'm simple. So, at the end of the day, when God tells me it's time for me to relax, I want to see some water, and I want to be able to put some bait on a line, man, and do me some fishing. That's it. That's it for me. I'll be good with that.
That sounds great. Just chilling and living and doing what you want to do.
Indeed.
Is there anything else you would like everyone to know about you?
I mean, I'm just, when you see me, you see yourself. I mean, at the end of the day, the simplest way that I could explain the way I want the general public to look at me, and really everybody, is that when you look at Isaac Wright Jr., you see yourself. I am you, and that's the best way that I can say it. I am you. I'm looking you eye to eye. I'm not looking down at you, and I'm not looking up at you. I'm looking at you as my equal, and I'm the man that's asking you to allow me to do great things on your behalf. That's it.
That's great. Please let everyone know how they can connect with you and continue to follow your journey.
There's a couple of things I'd like for you all to do. One is, please follow the campaign. The social handle is at Wright for NYC. So that's very simple. WRIGHT for NYC. That's one thing. The other thing is, please, donate if you can. And it doesn't matter where you live. We're doing something really incredible in South Florida. We're doing fundraisers there. It's going to start on the 18th. And it's called our Lead by Example fundraiser. And this is the first of its kind. A New York City mayoral candidate doing a fundraiser in South Florida. This is not a national campaign, obviously. It's a campaign that's in New York City. However, one of the things about my candidacy, and one of the things that I want to do, I want to be able to lead by example. I know everybody in just about every city, and I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people in just about every city, they have their qualms about their leaders. They have things that they want to see changed, or they have things that they want to see happen within their city. And what I'd like to be able to do is I'd like to be able to stand as that example for mayors across the country to say, you know what, this is the guy that I want to follow. These are some of the plans that I want to implement for my city. And so one of the things about this Lead by Example fundraising event is I wanted to attract those people who are looking at me and saying, yes, we aren't satisfied with what's going on in our city. And we would like to look towards you as an example for our upcoming leaders and some of our present leaders. So we're going to be there. We're going to support you. And we're going to say to our leaders, this is the guy that we want you to look at as an example for what we want you to do. And that's why I'm going to be in South Florida on the 18th in Miami, on the 19th in Fort Lauderdale, and on the 20th in West Palm Beach. So come out and support us, and join us on our website, www.wrightfornyc2021.com.
And I will try to make the Fort Lauderdale one, maybe the Miami. I'm not sure, but I'll try my best to make it out for you.
I appreciate that.
Support. Yes.
We'd love to have you there.
Thank you. I wish you all the best with the election. I hope you win. Thanks for coming on this show and sharing your story. I look forward to seeing more of your work in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you guys for tuning into The Release Show. See you next time.